Primary school teachers of Reddit, what is the most shocking display of psychopath-like behavior you've seen? A grade 1 student said he had killed 2 bunnies and some birds. He wrote about it in his journal and drew a picture. Sure enough, the carcasses were found in the playground at recess. When we asked him why he did it, he said he wanted to know what it would feel like to kill something. Another student, grade 5, was sent to a sort of timeout room after a huge fight. He wasn't getting any attention after pushing over all the furniture, so he decided to piss in all 4 corners of the room. His mom finally came to pick him up and screamed at me for making him do this and called me a cunt. He had a speech impediment and kept repeating her, except he said cunt over and over again. The speech teacher part of me really wanted to say cunty. Like table. Oh dear, where to begin? Here's one that comes to mind. Kindergarten girl had a pair of scissors. I turned just in time to see her reach over and try to cut off another girl's ponytail. Not a major thing, because no cutting actually happened. But when I asked her why she was going to do that, because they normally got along very well, she said, in a simple, very straightforward tone of voice, because her hair is what she loves the most. Sent chills up my spine. I'm not a teacher myself, but my best friend works as a teaching assistant in a small primary school. She used to tell me about a little boy who would constantly give death stares to teachers and would generally refuse to interact with other children. My friend absolutely loves kids, but even she admitted she had never seen a child look so angry all of the time, like he hated the world, even though he was so young. He would face the wall during class time and repeatedly bash his head against the wall until staff intervened. He started biting a lot of the children and was told off for doing so in the dining hall one day. He then jabbed the dinner lady in the arm with his fork so hard that it drew blood. In my friend's classroom they had a small incubator with little chicks in that the children would help to look after and watch as they grew up. At one point he was left unattended and managed to squeeze one of the poor chicks to death. I don't know whatever happened with him because my friend got a job at another school, but the story has always stuck in my mind. The way she described him genuinely gave me chills. Went to school with a kid who enjoyed mumbling crazy things to himself all during class and in the hallways. Always felt bad for the guy and did my best to be nice to him. He regularly got caught writing hit lists and threatening to kill girls because none of them loved him. Surprisingly, it looks like he's doing a lot better now. My wife is a substitute teacher. I dropped her off to teach 2nd grade class in a downtown elementary school. These kids were the angriest students she ever met, and she used to teach in New York City. The moment class started they beat the ever-living crap out of each other, to the point that there was clumps of hair on the ground. She was also 6 months pregnant, and one student ran into her belly causing her to cry. She had called the office over and eventually said she wouldn't work in this class. They switched her to 1st grade. Woo, better right? Nope. They were worse. She threatened to move the temperature down on the behavior thermometer if they continue, which she eventually followed through. This caused meltdown city. They actually threw a desk at her. 1st grade kid throwing a desk at a pregnant lady. When I picked her up she burst into tears and was shaking. She said if she had driven there herself she would have just left. I wish she would have called me. I would have left work to get her. Took that school off the sub-call list. I'm not sure whether this is your standard of psychopath, but once I saw a 5-year-old boy cycling round and around his mum on a tricycle. He was pointing and laughing at her. His mum was sitting in the middle of the floor, crying her eyes out and biting herself, which I later discovered was self-harming. Little shit for brains had wound his mum up to a point where she was crying and then taunted her for self-harming. A guy in my primary school once snuck up behind the teacher and cut her ponytail off. The same kid also threw our pet hamster against the wall and then stomped his foot on its head. This killed the hamster. 1st grade boy, about 7 years old, ginger, chubby, pretty cute little dude, sitting fairly quietly at his desk. I look closer and he is slowly pressing the point of his pencil into the top of his hand, then lifting it to see the indentation it has made in his skin. He does this a number of times. pressing a little harder each time. Then he looks over at the kid next to him, who is quietly writing in his workbook, one hand flat on the table in front of him, and bang. He stabs his pencil into the top of the other kid's hand. Cue instant screaming from the poor little guy, who all of a sudden has a pencil solidly standing up in his skin, and little ginger guy is just sitting there looking slightly baffled at the crying, but entirely pleased as punch. My wife is a teacher and I volunteered in her class. I want to say this was her first grade class, but it could have been kindergarten. Anyways, one little girl was just messed up. Really bad family life and all that. She didn't know how to speak normally. She always yelled everything. A few times that year, she just started throwing desks and chairs. She would routinely just talk shit about people for no reason. Whenever I volunteered there, she called me ugly, bald, and fat in the span of 2 hours, running away after each insult. She was just a really mean, fucked up child. Back in 6th grade, we had a cage of guinea pigs and a tank of fish that we had groups assigned to look after them. Groups would be rotated, so that everyone at some point had a chance to look after the class pets. There was one kid, let's call him PJ, and his group was assigned to the guinea pigs. One morning just as class is starting, we see one of the guinea pigs floating at the top of the fish tank, dead. We were all pretty distraught, all being 11, except for PJ. He didn't try to deny it, but when asked about it, he stared our teacher in the eyes and said, "I just wanted to see how it looked while it struggled to survive." From then on, the classrooms were locked until the teachers opened them. PJ was made to go to the counselor after that. This was back in 2001. PJ added me on Facebook a few months ago. By all accounts he seems normal now, but yeah, certainly had the short odds for class psycho back then. Not a teacher, but have been in childcare on and off for years, currently off. I worked the daycare at a gym in high school, and there I met the 2 most psycho kids I've ever met before or since. Keep in mind that I was daycare director for a homeless mission at one point too. Lots of kids coming in with issues, but no, 2 spoiled rich kids at the gym were the worst. The first was Brad. Brad has a younger brother and sister, both dark-haired and petite, both very smart and kind. Brad was their opposite in every way. He was huge for his age, blonde, of average intelligence and pure evil. I had to pry him off of other kids all the time. His younger siblings were constantly covered in bruises because he would beat on them mercilessly. Several bite and bruise reports were written because of this kid. He drew awful pictures of blood and guts coming out of people. Said evil things like, "One day I'll get big enough that no one can stop me from hurting people." Once, I left to use the restroom, leaving only 5 kids in the care of my assistant. And the moment I left, Brad got another kid in a headlock and my assistant couldn't get him off. This is a 5 years old we're talking about. Full grown adult couldn't get him off this other kid. Staff started screaming for me, but before I could get my pants up, the other kid passed out from lack of air. Huge shit ensued, of course. Parents were told they couldn't bring Brad back. I think his parents ended up having to send him to a boarding school for special needs kids because his violence was so out of hand that CPS was going to take the younger 2 away. Great parents really, but that kid had issues they just couldn't control. The other was one of 2 sisters. Jessica, the older, was the crazy one. Both girls attended the gym childcare, both absolute spoiled brats. But I didn't know the extent of Jessica's issues until I started babysitting them at home as well. They lived in a B-level or split-level house, the kind where the main living area is half a flight up from the front door, usually a bedroom, living room, and utility area is half a flight down with a sunken garage attached. Their house was just like this. These girls were so spoiled that, at 6 and 7, the bottom floor was entirely theirs. They had their own living room, bathroom, and bedroom, complete with leather furniture and the latest in big screen TVs. At some point, they had to move the younger one's bedroom into a curtained off corner of the living room because Jessica kept trying to smother her in her sleep. They had a dog, and the parents warned me to keep it outside or away from Jessica at all times. Why? They had already been through 2 cats, a few hamsters, and several fish, all of which Jessica killed in one way or another. She had been known to cut, beat, and burn the poor dog, but they wouldn't find it another home. Once, neither wanted to eat the disgusting looking casserole that their mom had left for dinner. No biggie. I made them sandwiches with veggies and fruit instead. This is the point that I should mention that Jessica was very obese for her age. After eating 2 adult-sized sandwiches and everything else, she wanted more food. I told her that she'd had plenty for the moment. Maybe we'd have a snack in a little while and watch a movie. This sent her into an absolute rage. Kicking, screaming, banging her head, the works. Bro, I sent her stomping off to her room downstairs. About a minute later, I'm at the sink with my back to the stairs, and I hear a squeak of floorboards. I turned around a split second before a golf driver, the old solid wood kind, smashed me in the back of the skull. This girl had gone downstairs, and in less than a minute, decided to get one of her dad's golf clubs out of the garage, sneak back upstairs, and brain me with it. The whole time, laughing her head off about how no one would miss me when I died. I stopped watching them after that, but years later, when they would have been 11 and 10, I saw them at Target in the Halloween Island. Jessica full on punched her mother in the face over a costume wig. The mom already had one black eye and her younger sister just stood there silently immune to her sister's rages. A friend of mine used to teach kids with behavioral issues. She was about 7 months pregnant. One of the kids decided she didn't want her to have the baby. She waited until the teacher's aide walked out of the room to attack her, pushed her to the ground, and started kicking her stomach as hard as she could. Other students started yelling and helped pull her away. My friend almost lost the baby and had to go on bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. She had a healthy baby. The scary/sad part is the girl was 8 years old. Surprisingly for me, my friend went back to teaching this class. I taught 1st grade and had a student who was in trouble so often that I had to send a daily report to his parents about his behavior. A few instances of his behavior were as follows. He once tripped a kid at recess for no reason, and then began kicking him hard in the stomach. By the time I had gotten over there, he was calmly sitting on the other child's head. When I asked him why he did it, he replied, "I was tired." That confused me, so I asked him what he meant by that. He said, "Well, I don't see any benches around. Do you?" I had to sit on something. He had a special seat at my back table and he would mutter to himself while I was teaching. One day I had my assistant read to the class, so I could quietly stand behind him and listen to what he was saying. All I heard was pew, pew, pew. Later, I took him aside and asked him what he was doing. He told me he was playing video games in his head and shooting everyone because kids were worth 200 points. About 15 years ago, my mother had this little girl in her class. She's a K2 spec ed teacher. The girl's parents were both in prison and she stayed with her grandmother. Left to her own whims at home, her grandmother would find her squatting in the kitty litter box she had pulled in front of the TV. She'd have taken a crap in it and would stay in that third world squat position and begin to masturbate with the TV turned onto a signal-less channel with that old blizzard effect on. A couple years later, she attempted to burn her house down, and she was officially committed. I was terrified of her. A student held open scissors to my neck. The look in her eyes was the most terrifying part. It took 5 adults to stop her. Not a teacher, but primary school is full of little shits. It's not as bad as some of the other stuff here, but this story does show how fucked up kids are. Me and my best friend, when we were about 7/8, we found a whole load of wood lice in our schoolyard. At break and lunch we would play with them, and we got obsessed with insects. Everyone thought it was super weird because we were girls, but we didn't care. Then one day all the boys in our class had taken the blades out of their toppers, and when we went out for break they ran ahead of us to the wood lice and just started cutting them in half. One of the lice was pregnant, and when they cut her the babies swarmed everywhere, and the boys were just laughing as they smushed the tiny babies. Me and my friend were hysterical for the rest of the day. I get that killing insects is not as bad in people's minds as killing animals, but the way they got such pleasure from watching us try to stop them massacring the wood lice still creeps me out. Kid I went to school with put acid in a school fish tank. Apparently got expelled from his previous school for blinding pigeons in the playground and his next school for chasing girls around with his dick out. His dad was in the Russian mafia, which probably had something to do with it. Okay, I didn't witness this, but a student I taught, who was a little shit to everyone at school, he was so abusive to his own little brother, that brother slept in the bed between his parents to keep him safe. This lasted a few weeks until the family got the older boy into an inpatient facility. Never saw him again. He was 9. I had a 3rd grader bring a pack of razor blades to school on my first day. I pulled him outside the room, sat on the railing and said, "Hey, I'd like to understand why you did this." He calmly looked me in the eye and said he wanted to sharpen his pencils. I said people don't usually use razor blades to sharpen pencils, but I can think of a few reasons someone might bring razor blades to school. Maybe you wanted to hurt someone, or you were afraid someone would hurt you, or you thought they were cool and wanted to show them to your friends. He said they had to cut up my food. Still totally calm. He got suspended for 1 day, to all appearances. He was a well-adjusted, smart kid who got along with his classmates. I did notice that every time I'd try to watch him out of the corner of my eye to get some insight into his personality, he immediately noticed and started watching me out of the corner of his eye. This isn't usually the case with little kids. He could also turn his emotions on and off like flipping a light switch. He never seemed to lose control. Never acted angry, never cried, would sometimes get happy for a second or two, but tended to catch himself and stop. I still have no idea what to think. Well, at one of the schools I work at, I heard about a 9 or 10-year-old kid who would get caught masturbating in empty classrooms very often. I'm not sure of the details, but when his teacher was getting observed by someone from the district sitting in the back of her classroom, very standard routine. The kid was in the front row jerking off and giving her a strange look. I guess none of the other kids seemed to notice, although that is hard for me to believe. She ended up finishing her lesson and not saying anything to the district representative. I have no idea how it was handled after. However, come to find out, his parents were going through a divorce and his father was a cross-dresser and would bring home a lot of different men. I'm not sure if this had any effect on his behavior, but I can't imagine it was the easiest thing for him to handle. Sorry, I don't have much more information than that.